What is up, weirdos? Your fellow weirdo, Jeremy Grinsteiner here as the host of the Weird and Strong podcast. This week we have a guest who is part of the community for 023 coaching, the holistic lifestyle systems experts out there, and it's Jordan Todd. I just recently went through their program, and it was fantastic to get to know Jordan on a much more personal level, get to hear his story, what his path looked like in going from CrossFit bro to somebody who's helping coaches truly transform lives in the most holistic and balanced way possible. So, without further ado, let's get weird. All right, welcoming Jordan Todd to the Weird and Strong podcast. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Jeremy. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to see you. We've been on a break for a couple of past weeks where I'm used to seeing you every single week coming off of the 023 level 2. And so it's awesome to see you again after having a couple of weeks off.
Definitely. Yeah. We've been connected every week there for such a long time. It's good to be back on and back in front of you here.
Fantastic. So let's start it off like we always do here on the Weird and Strong podcast. I have a weird question for you. Are you ready?
Well, let's go. I like weird.
All right. We're coming back to one of my old favorites today. It's a good old would you rather. Would you rather every time music plays, so anytime music is playing in the background, whether you play it or somebody else, you hear silence, or Glenn Frey's The Heat Is On? Those are the only two things you get to hear.
That's a tough one because I don't know who Glenn Frey or what The Heat Is On is.
I'm sure you've heard this. It's
yeah.
Whoa, whoa, the heat is on.
Oh, Jeremy, I think I might need you to keep singing here.
Keep doing this.
Yeah. I would probably have to go with silence.
Go with the silence?
Silence, just because I think, like I say, I don't particularly know that song, but I don't think there's any song. So to clarify, that means I would only ever be able to hear one song ever. If there's any music playing, it's that one. Yeah.
And it could be, that's just an easy one because it is a little bit of an obnoxious song.
Yeah.
That makes it, but it could be any one song.
Exactly. I can't think of any one song that it's like anytime music was on, it had to be that one. Mm-hmm. And so in which case I'm a pretty big fan of silence. So I'll take silence to start us off here.
Cool. Thanks for playing along with that, even though you didn't know the song all that much. It's fun.
I'm gonna look it up once we get off here.
Yeah, that's gonna be
maybe I'll need to change my choice after that.
Yeah, and then you're gonna go, well, now it actually is stuck in my head, and exactly. That's all I hear now.
Silence is no escape. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. So we talked a little bit about how we're connected through your program 023, and our focus here is on the things that are unconventional about people. And so I think that I know that your program and what you guys are doing is definitely unconventional in the space of health, wellness, and fitness. What led you to get down this path? Or tell us the tale of how you got to where you are as part of this thing called 023 or the other 23 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so to just kind of start at the end and then we'll go back to the beginning.
Sure.
023 is all about the other 23 hours, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual health, focusing on food, sleep, movement, mindset, going beyond the typical when it comes to health and fitness and what people think about when they go to work on themselves and say a gym setting. Mm-hmm. To have that context, but to go back and think of particularly how it started from an unconventional lens, it was really I was following a very conventional path, mm-hmm. and I was miserable.
Yeah.
And I was doing all the things that from what I could tell society was saying, like, do this, follow that, do more of this. And just internally, like there was not much joy. There wasn't much fulfillment. And it was generally like an unhappy way of living. Mm-hmm. And to get specific to it, I was an athlete growing up. I was a hockey player and was doing that for as long as I could. And then that eventually started coming to an end. But then amidst that, I was just achieving at the highest level in everything I could, whether it was academics, whether it was sports, whether it was just in the gym or any of these areas, basically any area I could. I was achieving at the highest level. I was always chasing the next thing. And no matter what I did, I would get the thing. And then it's like, it didn't change anything. Mm-hmm. It didn't change any piece about my life. And so there was this societal view of achievement and success and what that looked like. And in doing that, I didn't get what I thought was on the other side. And that's really what started questioning of like, this can't be it.
Mm-hmm.
This can't be all that life is. And that really started getting me in the mentality. I was fortunate to have a really great mentor who was in the yoga and like life coaching space,
Mm-hmm.
who I reached out to. And that really started it. It was my introduction to a more unconventional way of living that brought me so much peace, so much joy, so much fulfillment that it's like, wow, okay, I want to lean into this and see what's on the other side. So that's really what started the journey of all this.
Very cool. Yeah. And like to rewind it back to a little bit of the conversation we had off air, is that you were reflecting and you were saying, like, what actually is weird, or like, how do I actually define some of these things? Do you have any ideas that you've had some time to reflect and had some time to talk about your journey a little bit of what that looks like for you, or what has that look like?
Yeah. And so it's funny because I was mentioned to you just before this of in present day, it's like, what actually is weird anymore? Like, what is unconventional? And at this point, between, the coursework, I spend a lot of time around people like you, people who are searching for call it unconventional, that it's almost hard to separate, like, what is the norm, what is not? Because the bubble I surround myself with are people chasing this, call it weird way of living greatly. But I was thinking, like, the things that to me, if I had to call it weird compared to like a societal standard, would be living in alignment with yourself and not what other people think you should do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's doing the work to be clear on what matters to you and respectfully disregarding other people's beliefs about what you should do with your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from like parents, that comes from friends, from societal connections and networks and stuff like that. And like respectfully disregarding what they think you should do and leaning into what you think you should do. And that's messy because, as we're learning this, we're not very good at it, but it's the exploration and the journey into it that eventually you start to get better and you start to lean into that and go into that. And then, from there, I've gone into all kinds of weird, different things of yoga teacher trainings and going deep into the yoga world. I've done, several experiences with like plant medicine and that side of things, which we can get into any of these if it's relevant for you. But I think weird is just, marching to the beat of your own drum and doing what feels right to you without real concern for what other people are going to think about that. And then wherever that takes you, like, that's your weird, do more of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I wanted to ask about, so you talked about having this very specific bubble around you of people who are in that personal development. They're going down their own paths and they're forging their own paths. What is it like when you get into groups of people who are not doing that?
I just have a lot of, well, first off, I would say that I'm just intentional about the space I put myself into, and I have boundaries around different people and things like that for what fills my own cup up. But when I see that, this is a shift that I've made over the last few years. At first, there was like judgment towards those people.
Oh, okay.
How do they not see this? Like, they're like, let me help you. Like, and I would try to fix people. And now it's really just a lot of like love and empathy for people. And as opposed to trying to fix anyone else, it's more so, how can I radiate the way of being that I want to put into the world? And if anyone's interested or anyone's in a place of looking to grow, like they'll come to you. Yeah. They'll come when the time is ready. And it's like, they know what's available, what's out there, and they'll come when ready. So that's definitely a shift that's been, I don't spend a lot of time around those people just because it's, tends to be more draining than filling up. But when it's there, it's not nearly as negative an experience as it used to be, maybe.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this after a couple of experiences that I've had in the past couple of weeks of getting into communities that are outside of my bubbles. I was like, oh yeah, okay. I remember being a person like that or having that view, and I was like, oh, it almost feels like culture shock in a way when you're re-exposed to it or experience what it's like for a normal quote unquote person, or a person following the traditional lifestyle paths that we have in Western countries or North America. And through your path of getting to this point of going from that achievement perspective, or like that chasing achievement, that hamster wheel of achievement, if we call it that, getting into the path where you are now, what was that journey like for you? Was that an immediate thing? Did it take some time? Like, paint us that picture.
Yeah, it was not immediate. It definitely took some time, and it was one of the hardest and also most worthy things I've ever done, macro talking of my life. And so to kind of talk through the reflection of how it actually went about is I was coaching in a gym. I was a full-time CrossFit coach. I was, looking for the next iteration of my career, but more so just my own life. Like I was done competing, or I was done playing hockey. It's like, do I want to compete in CrossFit? Like what's the thing I'm going to do now? And that's when I reached out and made the connection with my still mentor, Pam Rader, who's a phenomenal human being. Started working with her one-on-one. I reached out and was like, hey, I feel like I'm struggling. Like, could we get on a call and could you, just see what you can do? Had no idea it was going into any of this, but it really started opening my eyes to what was possible and what I actually wanted with my life. And through that process, I worked with her regularly for quite a while. But the thing that happened was the life I had built to that point all of a sudden didn't align with who I wanted to be. And so for about 6 months, it was a process where I felt like I had basically nobody, because all of the friends I had made were called the old Jordan, aligned with them, and they didn't really align anymore. And there's nothing wrong with them. It's just the future of where I was trying to go, they didn't really fit in. And so with that, it's like, it was a really lonely, really hard time in that transition. But on the other side was the ability to start like rebuilding who I am, rebuilding my circles, my networks with people who fit the version of life that I was trying to create. And some of those people that I met in that transition time are some of the best friends I still have to this day. And then the people I continue to make friends with are from this alignment. And so the thing that I'm so glad I was able to do was take that first step, to be willing to go through that hard step, or that hard stage of transition, because it's, things need to almost like burn to the ground so that you can rebuild it back up. And that burn phase is not fun, but it's necessary so that you're not just building on top of this, crummy foundation. And so when I say, yeah, it wasn't quick and it wasn't necessarily easy, that was a lot of what happened. And then it really started opening my eyes to like, okay, what else is possible? Pretty much all the things I thought were true for this first chapter of my life turned out to be completely false. What else do I believe is also not serving me? And that's where I really started going to the other sides of things. Like for my professional career, I started looking into like the yoga space. I started looking into like the life coaching space. I already had a really thorough background of fitness, physical movement knowledge. It's like, what else is there to start connecting some of these pieces together? And that's where it really started to pick up momentum and started to grow.
That's really cool. In looking back at that lonely time of being in that transition from recognition of where you wasn't serving you to building this new version of yourself, what were the what would have been something that would have made that journey easier for you? So thinking of the people who may be listening to it, who may be in that same situation, or that they know that that's ahead of them. What were the things that you would have liked to have had in that time period?
I think looking back is that it was actually necessary. Like it is how it was supposed to be. And if I didn't have a time like that, then what's on the other side wouldn't be so valuable. The thing that I would love to have had then that I can potentially help someone with now is the belief and the faith in what's on the other side. It's like a light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, I can't tell you how long this tunnel is, how long you're going to be walking in darkness here, but I can tell you there is light on the end of the tunnel, light at the end of the tunnel, if you're willing to walk this path. And that's where at that time I had I shouldn't even say I had a bit of uncertainty, because I had a coach who was very much reminding me of the light at the end of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. And that's all I would really say is like the faith in what you can't see, that if you commit to what actually is important to you and just exploring that, commit to exploring what's important to you, there is something on the other side that you don't have to keep just living a subpar, mediocre life forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. And, was there a moment that really, like, was there a pivotal moment that put you onto that path, or was it just that general dissatisfaction with where you were and what you were doing?
Yeah, well, there's a series of things that I'm sure led to it, but the one moment that I'd still reflect on is I can remember, this is when I was like building my fitness coaching business, and I had a photographer come in, a friend of mine, take a bunch of photos and stuff I could use. And I was shredded at the time, mm-hmm. like 6-pack, popping abs. I was really strong. Like all these things were going really well from like a physical surface. And I remember looking at those photos and I'm like, dang, that guy, like he looks like the peak pinnacle of health and fitness and stuff like that. And I remember looking at that and thinking, shit, I'm miserable. I look like that. And I like to use a word like I'm depressed. Mm-hmm. I'm living in a depressed state. And the connection that made in that time was there's no amount of fitness. There's no workouts. There's nothing I can do from a gym training perspective that's going to fix the problem that I'm feeling. Mm-hmm. I've gone to like the absolute extreme of that as best as I possibly can. And this isn't the solution to that problem that I'm feeling. And so that was really a pivotal moment in recognizing there needs to be a change here.
Yeah. I think I just saw a post from you guys at 023 just today of like, you've heard that you can't outwork a bad diet. I'm trying to remember how the rest of it goes.
But what's even more true is you can't out anything a bad mindset.
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, for myself, that we've talked about this on not podcasts before of for myself too, of like this change or this something that could be inherently weird for a lot of people is thinking that where you think you want the transformation of changing the physical vehicle of your body and assuming that that's going to change how you feel on the inside is oftentimes, if not always, the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was having a conversation actually this morning with someone talking about how when people want to lose weight, when people want to change physically, it's not that they care about being fit. They want to feel how they think fit people feel. Mm-hmm. And in that, it's like, what if you could feel that way without changing anything about yourself physically? Would that still be a win? And for most people, the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. And so by no means am I saying don't pursue physical goals. Those are great, but just understand what problem that's solving. And it might not be solving the thing you think it is. Mm-hmm. And that was what I experienced through going to basically the depths of physical fitness and realizing, this isn't really it.
Yeah.
This isn't it.
In thinking about, your journey thus far of where you've gotten to, what were the things that, aside from your personal experiences, what were the things that brought you to this work of 023, of the other 23 hours? What was that like from a journey perspective?
Yeah. So the journey of this was, from a coaching perspective, I was still primarily coaching like physical fitness. For those of you guys familiar, I was coaching like an active lifestyle. I was helping people get rid of their chronic pain without going to the doctor, having to like miss the gym, and kind of that bridge between those worlds. And I'll humbly say I was quite good at it. Like I could help people fix their back pain. I could help people fix their knee pain, whatever it is. Mm. But then they would fix their knee pain and they still wouldn't be happy. Mm-hmm. And this was as I was going through the same thing for myself of like it's the other 23 hours that are really making the biggest difference for me. I was exploring a lot myself. I was going through a lot of these transformations. And that's when I connected with Brian. Mm-hmm. And so Brian was the original 023 idea. He had this starting to come together right as I was essentially looking to build this on my own. I was creating this in my own formats, and he came to be with like a bit more of a developed idea. And he's like, well, let's build this together. And it's like, yeah, that sounds great. And so with that, we were talking the physical fitness side isn't completely it. I also believe like the mindset isn't completely it either, because if you like, insight doesn't change your life, action does. Mm. And so we can have all of these insights and this, mental massage and still not change anything about our lives. Where the work that we did, that Brian really helped piece together for me, was bringing it down to like, what are the daily practices? What do we do every day that helps create the type of life that we want to live, and being the type of person we want to be in a very holistic aspect, without leaving anything out, without isolating anything, and just really trying to live a great life. And what are all the things that go into that without leaving anything out?
Yeah. You touched on a word that may pluck some people on the nose or feel buzzwordy. Holistic. Can you talk a little bit about what does that mean for you, or how do you define that, or how do you bring that towards your practice?
Holistic. You're right. It is a buzzword, and it gets thrown around a lot. Some people might not really know what it even means. That was at the root of a lot of what we started to do, and it remains that way to this day. And holistic for me just means what the root is, like whole, like WHOLE, holistic. And in that, it's that we are a whole human being. And so in order to optimize our lives, we need to look at the whole human being and understand that nothing is isolated. We can't look at this thing without looking at that, because it's all connected. And if we try and segment and isolate, that's when we start to, have you ever seen with like a balloon animal, if you squeeze one end, all of a sudden it pops out at the other end, and then you squeeze that and it pops out somewhere else. Yeah. That's what ends up happening. We try and spot treat stuff by looking at, let's address this, and then another area pops up, where if we just address the whole human being, the whole tide can rise. Mm-hmm. And that's where, like, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, we want to look at the whole human being, because we're not just a component of parts, we're human. And holistically speaking, that's how we describe it. That's how I like to describe it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And even thinking from that balloon animal metaphor is like, in thinking back to like times in my own life where you put all of that pressure in one area and realize that, oh, well, I'm doing really well here, but everything else is piling up over here. It's like, oh, I'm going to spend all this time in the gym and not realize that all my dishes are piling up for the past week, and go, oh, I've been ignoring all of my basics that would help take care of me in this warped idea that I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then to go one step deeper to it as well is, oftentimes, I did this for a long time, we identify ourselves with our challenge, with our struggles, with our issues. Mm-hmm. And so if we fix one thing, we actually feel like we lose our identity. So we need to go look for another issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now it's like, we can never actually fix ourselves, because being quote unquote broken is part of who we view ourselves as. Mm-hmm. And so that's where it's addressing the story of who we say we are is a part of this holistic approach. If we want to actually make a change to how we feel and how we experience it. Otherwise, we're really just chasing symptoms around the body, never really getting anywhere in regards of how much work we do.
Yeah. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about something I hear in the space of comedians on podcasts and things like that. We're like, well, I can't go do that. I can't fix that, whatever that means, because then I'll stop being funny. That's what makes me funny. And it's like, well, is that actually true?
Funny enough. Okay. I think partly yes. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you agree with this or not. I think partly yes, that it is I'll circle this back into something that I'm working on presently, is that for a long time, I achieved at a really high level because I viewed achieving as the only thing that would ever make me feel like I was enough as a human being. Mm-hmm. And so achieving was like, I gotta go do this, otherwise I'm worthless, essentially. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty good motivator to achieve things at a high level or to achieve well.
Yeah.
Going back to the kind of comedian example, is some of this trauma, some of this this stuff they're dealing with may fuel them to be good at the thing that they're in.
Yeah.
In which case the question then comes in, what's more important, being good at this thing or actually being happy?
Yeah.
And that's for, a person to decide. But I think there is actually like a hair of truth to that.
Yeah. I can see what you're saying. I think that I'm going to take that another step.
Yeah.
Talking about it, something kicked loose a little bit is that it feels like that's what's necessary to start or to create the pattern. So like, now that that gear of achievement, they know that gear of, this is how, I observe things differently than everybody else in a way that others find funny. I can heal the trauma. I can heal that belief that I'm not enough and still do the thing because it's a gear I know real well.
I agree. The thing that, and this is where I'm exploring this currently, is once you do the work to fundamentally feel like you are enough with doing nothing. Like I'm just as is. I wake up in the morning and the business falls apart. I gain 50 pounds. I can never do another muscle up in my life. All that happens. I'm still enough. And I believe that in my core. When you have that belief, what is the motivator to work hard anymore? It's like there is motivators, and we can talk about that, but there is a real thing of that extra gear of like suffering to succeed sometimes goes away, or it can be an interesting thing when you do have this sense of enoughness, and then the motivation comes from a different place, but we can talk about that later. Yeah.
Well, I've heard this from others as well, of like, especially from other men that I've talked to on this podcast and elsewhere, of like having that, for lack of a better term, like testosterone fueled drive that comes from many times a place of hurt or a place of trauma, or a place of lack of love for self or any of those types of avenues. And that in learning to soften that and start to have a softer approach to yourself, that that edge starts to feel like it goes away.
And that's where there's a little bit of an in between. And then you have the opportunity to find motivation from a different source.
Yeah.
That's where the money is. That's where the magic is. And it comes from, this is where I would view this as a very spiritual connection, a very spiritual process, which if we want to talk about weird and unconventional, like I would consider myself a fairly spiritual person in maybe an unconventional way, but the motivator to achieve, to quote unquote succeed at things comes now from a belief of, I want to honor the highest version of me. I know what's possible when I view, Jordan as the highest self, and I want to honor that. And I want to move towards that versus move away from the scarcity and the fear and the lack, and actually move towards possibility and expansion and where I can go. And that's the motivator now. And it's a different feeling from that edge of like a fire underneath your ass, and more of like a positive pull towards what you're capable of. And it's a different feeling, but the day-to-day is infinitely more fulfilling, and you still have an opportunity to achieve the outcome. So it's like, I'm going to choose that 10 times out of 10, having been on both sides of it.
So something you just said, I'm going to reflect this back and see if I'm hearing this right.
Okay.
Is that the way that you showed up before for performance, it felt like perhaps you were pushing yourself. And now it can feel like you're pulling yourself forward. So rather than being pushed or forced, that pressure from behind, being helped up, being pulled up.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I feel I guess to put it in another term as well, it felt like previously I was doing that to move away from something.
Mm-hmm.
But in that, it's like your shadow. It's never actually gone.
Yeah.
It's there. You're never going to get away from it. It was moving away. And then this is now, it's like moving towards. So it's like I was moving away from something I didn't want, which is a generally negative experience, versus now it's moving towards something that I do want, possibility, all those things.
Yeah.
It's less of a push, more of a pull.
Yeah. It made me think of the funny aside of me being not very athletic until I was in my 30s, and then also picking a sport where there's not a lot of picking heavy things up versus like long distance running. And so my thought always was, when I saw people out running on the street or doing marathons, is, what are you running from? Your problems?
Yep.
And even somebody who is, and I've experienced this and seen this as well for people in strength sports, is that we can still use those activities as a way to run away from. We can still use that as a way to hold ourselves back or come from a place of I'm not enoughness.
100%. And that was me to a T.
Yeah.
And the tricky part about the human ego is that it is tricky. And because you mentioned, you say you notice that in like strength sports, I think it's very rampant there. I mean, running endurance sports, I think it's very rampant there. Yeah. The arena I've put myself in more strongly in the last few years is, I'll call it like mountain sports. I'm big into like downhill mountain biking and skiing. Yeah. And so I do basically, that's my winter, that's my summer, is dedicated to those two things. And it can equally be the same way, where there's times where I'll catch myself, like I'm going out for a ski and it's like, wait, am I actually doing this, or am I just doing this to try and distract myself from the shit that I know I actually need to do? Yeah. And there's times where that's true. And it's definitely a real thing, where this was part of the holistic approach and why I see so much value in that. Because if we are one dimensional, this one dimension can actually be just more of a crutch to us than something that's advancing us forward. And so, what are we, you say, like, what are they running from? Yeah. It's like, what are they lifting for? Like a lot, similar motivations for a lot of it, I'm sure.
So for yourself, and looking at that and still catching and having the awareness to be able to find those times when you are running away from something or avoiding something, using the activities that you love to avoid something. Any of the people listening to this may have their own version of that. It could be something like listening to music or watching TV. What is something you could recommend for folks who may not have that awareness to start to develop that awareness when they may be defaulting into that distraction versus being present with whatever their loved activity is?
I think, to put simply, would just be like, are you doing the work? And like I call it, capital W work, like this work as a whole on ourselves. And if not, just to take a step back and start like thinking about your thinking a little bit, thinking about your thoughts. What are you actually a yes for? What do you want in your life? And are you taking steps towards that? Are there any thoughts? And like, when I say this, it's not something that you would tell to other people, because oftentimes that can be a bigger step. But just like when it's you with you, is there anything that you're not being truly honest with yourself about? Yeah. And just sit with that for a second. And there's no judgment of yourself either. It's just what is. Or and when you start to get, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
What if the judgment was positive? Instead of saying there's no judgment, say, hey.
I would actually look to remove either charge.
Sure.
For a more neutral stance. And I just say this because if you are willing to attach a positive, it's only a matter of time before that does swing to a negative based on different contexts.
Well, it's like Dr. Joe Dispenza says, is a memory without emotional charge is wisdom.
There you go. And that's it. And it's like positive would likely be better than negative. But if you attach positive to something, that means there are things you attach negative to. Yeah. And so if possible, like just to get like, what is my teacher calls it the naked reality. Something that if you looked at it from any angle, this is what it is, without any opinions, without any judgments, just what is. And it's like, it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. And then from there, you can make a decision based on that information about what you want more of, what you want less of, and do something from there. And then that's when, once you can start to cultivate just a little bit of awareness, now all of a sudden, because we were talking of, are you using these things as crutches and as distractions? That can start to come into play. And just like, okay, is there something that maybe I'm looking to distract myself from? Is there, like, what are the we'll call them addictions that we're using in these ways? Because we typically think of like alcohol, drugs, things like that, but we use positive things for negative uses sometimes.
Yeah. Well, even like look at like the negative health outcomes of, or the negative health outcomes of things that could be healthy. So like we have this idea of something like orthorexia, where people are predisposed with the cleanness or healthiness of their food that actually causes them harm. And so they can still use that as a crutch of whatever it is that's lying under the surface.
Yeah. What's fire can cook your food or burn your house down.
Yeah.
It's how you use it that comes into play. And what I've found from my experience and would, why I would encourage others to explore is that when you're using things for distraction, at best, they basically get you to a baseline. At best, they basically remove the negative feeling to get you to a place where you're like, okay, level. And with that, that's like neutral. Baseline is basically the best you're capable of feeling. And so if you think you can enjoy this as is, imagine how good it's going to feel when you're doing it for just the purpose of it without any distraction. And that's where the mountains are my, call it like my church at this point. That's where I go to do my work. And the experiences that I have in the mountains are mind blowing. The connection I feel with myself, with this planet, with the other people I get to do this stuff with, it's like indescribable of what I get to feel and experience in these places. And I credit a large amount of that to the work I do, well, both in them and then primarily outside of them, to ask these questions, to dig into these sorts of things so that when I go there, I can come in empty and just fill up with all that's around me and all that's there. And whether that's you going to the gym or, lifting weights or running or things like, or any of these things that you enjoy to do, allowing them to fill you up as opposed to like hold you together, basically.
So in talking about these mountain activities of downhill skiing and mountain biking, were those things that you had done as a kid, or is that something that you discovered later in life?
Later in life. Yeah.
Okay.
It was, for the entirety of my life, I dedicated every ounce of energy to playing hockey. That was it. And once that was done, all of a sudden it's, well, I have a whole bunch of energy. What am I going to do with this?
Yeah.
And started exploring some different things. And it was just through different connections, got into skiing. And then my dad actually got me into mountain biking. And it just really, grabbed a hold of me and really grabbed a hold of, this is something that I want to pursue. I want to put my attention towards. And then just the connection of being outside and the presence that is possible out there is something that is rarely felt elsewhere in life, and something that I've leaned into. So very much later in life.
Yeah. So like, did that coincide with the journey that you've been telling us about of this transition away from being a CrossFit coach and post hockey and going into this inner work, working on yourself? Did those two things coincide at all?
They did. And actually, just as I'm thinking about it now, I think it was a fairly significant part of, I'll call it like my healing in this journey, because when I finished playing hockey, particularly, I was floundering for an identity. of trying to attach myself to something in particular. And just in thinking about it, of when I got into both skiing and biking particularly, that was not the motive. And I haven't really thought about that until this question here, but it wasn't like, oh, I want to be a skier and I want to like take that on as my identity. It was just something that brought me so much joy and so much just fulfillment of like being outside, spending time with people, this activity that I have the opportunity to progress and better myself in. It's physically demanding. And I see the progression here. And it was just something that lit me up so much that I felt like it connected to myself in a lot of ways. And that was a really big part of, I think, this next chapter of my life and everything that's gone since then.
Yeah. And that I'm willing to venture a guess in that having that ability to make that connection to self as this activity as part of that journey just reinforce that love for the activity even further.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And that was, so I would tip my hand on this one. One of the reasons I asked this question is being on, my own version of that journey of coming from the identities of a weightlifter and things like that, of, okay, what are the next activities that I can do for the sheer enjoyment and not aiming to be the best or compete or do something for the sake of the enjoyment alone, of like, what does that exploration look like when we have busy adult lives, and how do we find our way in that regard, especially when we're talking about these lonely or darker times when we start to change our identity.
Yeah. And it just makes me think of going back to like the judgment of ourselves within this, of giving up the idea that there's anything necessarily to find on the other side, and more that it's a journey of looking.
Yeah.
And if we continue in the looking for what lights us up, what feels good to pour ourselves into, if we just keep in that looking, we're just going to find more and more that meets those criteria. And then that just becomes who you are, becomes part of this. And then when all of a sudden maybe that stops feeling that way, it's like we have the opportunity to shift and the opportunity to start leaning into other things and growing in new ways. And so, sorry, my mind's going a few different ways. Any questions to follow? Or what was the question at the start, or anything to follow?
Well, it's like more of a general comment of like, being on that journey. And like, I really enjoy what you said there of it's about the search, or if I put a different spin on it, it's on just experiencing life and experiencing the journey of that. And whether you're playing a game or a sport, is opening yourself up to the possibility of experience versus a expectation of what that experience is going to give you.
Yeah. That's presence. That's, gratitude, whatever you want to call it. And it also isn't to say that like you don't ever want to like get better at things or improve at it, but it's the cliche saying of like the journey is the destination, where it's like all these things that we're doing in getting stronger and, the weightlifting world. Yeah, sure. That, when you hit the PR at the meet, that feels really good. But ultimately it's the 6 months of training that leads up to that. That is like, that's the reward, is getting to do something and push yourself and progress. And even when you don't feel like getting in there and just getting the percentages done and doing that anyway, and being the type of person who leans into these things, that's the value, because that's life. Like the PR moment that's what, 3 seconds,
if that,
out of that your hands are on that barbell, versus the totality of life that is making up, leading to, and then beyond that moment. And so what are those moments made up of that can create more of what we want and create more of what feels good for us?
Absolutely. In the lens of weightlifting is that, you hit the PR, cool, well, now you do it all over again.
Yep. What's the next PR?
I was like, okay, well, you add another kilo, add another.
Yeah.
The journey only ends when you decide.
And the only purpose of the game is to really keep playing the game and to keep staying in it. And so I say this, I want to make sure that I'm stepping down off of like the soapbox on this, because I'm very much in this journey. I don't want it to come from a place of like, I have this all figured out, but leaning into that of the day to day and setting ourselves up in a way that feels really good. Yeah, sure. To create these high moments that are like the peaks and stuff like that. But most of life is spent not at that peak. Yeah. And that's what we're looking to create, something that is meaningful and feels good for us.
Because how boring would life be if you were at endless PRs?
Yeah. Endless PRs. Every single session was a PR and it was guaranteed.
Yeah. Every day is a beautiful sunny day. It's perfect 70 degrees or whatever's a perfect temperature for you.
Yep.
You start to pray for a rain cloud every once in a while.
When I saw a post yesterday that I was just scrolling, and it was talking about that same idea of how boring would life be if every outcome we wanted was 100% certain and guaranteed.
Yeah.
The reason for the journey, the reason for doing this is actually because of the possibility it could not happen. That's what keeps us in this game. Otherwise, like, there would be no purpose to do it.
Yeah.
And certain things obviously have higher levels or lower levels of certainty, but that's why we do it.
Yeah. And that I'm paraphrasing a paraphrasing of an abstract of a study. But it was talking about childhood research into motivation, and exactly what you were talking about with the path of the reward or the fulfillment of that 12-week cycle of weightlifting is in the middle of the 12-week cycle of doing the work and doing the hard work and pushing yourself in that area. Is that when they did an experiment with these kids, they gave them praise at the end of whatever they did for being so intelligent or so talented or so smart, that they saw a major drop off in subsequent motivation. When they praised them for how hard they worked, they saw a drastic uptick in subsequent motivation. And so it's even looking at that from ourselves, of when we have our achievements and when we find that fulfillment of giving ourselves that credit of, I worked really damn hard at this, and I'm really proud of that fact. Not that I'm so proud about how smart or how amazing I am. It's reinforcing that for ourselves and reinforcing this idea that it is about our journeys.
Well, that's the growth mindset. It's the belief that we have the ability to grow, learn, develop, and we seek out challenge and adversity because we know it will make us better. We don't need to just prove and protect what we think we are. It's like, no, I'll put myself out there to fail because that's what's going to make me better. And 5 years from now, I'm going to be infinitely further along than I am if I sit here and try and just prove how good I am all the time.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Flipping things around.
We're going on a bit of a tangent. Let's get it back on track.
Well, I might have I believe I have a completely different tangent in this. In looking at, so you made a mention of not wanting to sound like you have it all figured out. And especially us as coaches, we can definitely come across that way to others sometimes, or we might actually even believe that amount of bullshit about ourselves. Oh, I've got it all figured out. I have all the answers. In that vein of being a coach, what drew you towards this profession in the first place?
Validation of other people.
Okay.
It's interesting because this isn't my motivator anymore, but the thing that got me into coaching, I believe upon reflection, is that I got a lot of positive reinforcement because I was good in a CrossFit coach setting. I was good at I knew a lot about fitness from just a long background of it. I knew a lot, and I was really good at having high positive energy that people just loved coming to class for. So I could help them with their fitness, and they just enjoyed the heck out of the experience. Mm-hmm. So from a CrossFit coach, that's a pretty good combination to be a group fitness instructor.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that, and people loved it right away. And so it's like, this is awesome. I love helping people.
Yeah.
And then we tell ourselves the story of like, oh, I just love helping people. And like, that's partially true. Mm-hmm. But the main thing that I think really hooked me was that validation that came with it, of doing something I was good at and coming to that space. And so this is one thing as well that I think is important that my coach reminds me of all the time is sometimes great things start with maybe suboptimal intentions.
Yeah.
If a lot of great businesses, probably most of them, started with the intention of seeking some sort of external validation. Mm-hmm. They wanted to prove their dad wrong, or they wanted to, show that they could make this much money. So they have the house and do it. A lot of stuff starts like that. And then the more effective, more aligned intentions actually happen along the way. Mm-hmm. That's okay. And for me, that was very much the case. Is it started as something that, was seeking validation, and it was a very good source that I could basically open the faucet and just every class receive all kinds of praise and validation. Mm-hmm. And that's what sunk the hook into me. And then it obviously grew from there, but that's what really started it from the beginning.
That was not the answer I was expecting.
I figured that. That's why the little pause at the start. I'm like, this is going to be fun.
Yeah. And I appreciate that level of honesty, because in these types of conversations, it can be very easy to go to the, always love to help people or not. And like the awareness of that and the willingness to bring that forward, I applaud you for so much.
Oh, well, thank you. And frankly, I think everything is motivated by some sort of ulterior motive like this. Mm-hmm. And it's just, you get to the awareness of it. And it's like, oh yeah, I can call myself on my own bullshit and laugh at it a little bit.
Yeah. And that's the best part of growth is getting to that point.
Yeah. And that's what actually to circle back real quick. This is why I think when we mentioned the positive negative, I look at that and I don't really view it as positive or negative. It just was. It's like, cool. Let's look at that. Let's move on. Yeah. And then we can do something with it if there's a better option out there. Mm-hmm. So,
and even looking at that from what we were talking about from that culture shock idea too, of being able to show up in other spaces and see something and go, oh, wow, I completely forgot that people live this way. Mm. And again, show up without a judgment in that regard too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be really helpful and it can be really healthy.
Definitely. Yeah. And so you started asking about coaching. I don't know. Do you have more to go on that line?
No, I really loved what you just painted on that as far as like the beginnings of it, and then knowing that it blossomed into something else that helped you along your journey.
Yeah.
Could you imagine that you would be where you are today had you not become a coach?
Personally or professionally?
Personally.
No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Becoming a coach, and a lot of what I continued to dive into was partially under the intention of, I want to learn this to help someone else with it. Mm-hmm. When in reality, it was learning it for myself.
Yeah. And
I was exploring it myself. And there's also the accountability lens of, if I want to help people with this, well, I got to live it times 10 if I want to be able to talk the talk here. Mm-hmm. And so from a personal perspective, I think in general, if any one thing were to change, we'd obviously lead a different life path. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I would be in as aware and as what I would consider a positive life experience as I am right now if I didn't go down the route of coaching, because that's what prompted a lot of the exploration that leads to like, what are a lot of the great things in my life now?
Yeah. Yeah. You touched a little bit on the side of plant medicines being a tool along your journey as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like? What led you to that as an avenue for personal growth?
Yeah. And so this is a fun one to talk about for me, because it's such a cool changing of beliefs mm-hmm. in general, because growing up, my parents raised me that like, drugs are bad. Like very, very clearly, drugs are bad. And so I've, never smoked weed, never did any of these things at all for the entirety of my life, really, until I started connecting with some people who were in this space, and particularly with Brian. And I don't think you ever met Matt, who was the other person. There was 3 of us originally with 023.
I don't believe so.
Yeah, he had parted ways, I think, before you came about, but they had quite a bit of experience with plant medicine and talked about the growth that came from it. And at first I was a little skeptical, and like, it's a little bit woo woo for me. And I'm like, no, I don't know if that's necessary type of thing. And
yeah,
just
sure. You're a bunch of hippies. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. And then the more I heard them speak with conviction about it, and then also just like spend some time researching myself of listening to other sources and actually learning a little bit of like the science of what's going on here, it really started to open my mind to it, to like, okay, what's possible here? And I'm like, okay, well, at the very least, if I want to make a judgment about this, it's only like, it makes sense that I'm willing to try things. We talk about the 3 X's of expertise of yourself is like explore, experiment, experience, experience being your ultimate guide. So it's like, well, let's explore it a little bit. And this is another case of like fire can cook your food or burn your house down. We'll call it plant medicine or psychedelics, things like that can very much be an escape. They can be a different source, or they can be a powerful tool to help you unlock levels of your consciousness and things like that. And so it started out with just a few friends and I who were very interested in this space doing, we'll call it our own smaller plant medicine ceremonies with some different forms of mushrooms that we were exploring with. And then I eventually went out to meet with Brian in New York, and we did an ayahuasca ceremony. And so that was a little over, that's coming up on 2 years ago now. And it was an incredibly transformative experience. And I don't think it's a complete fix for people where some people can lean into that, but I believe it can be a powerful tool in helping clarify and realign what it is you're looking to do with your life and things like that. And there's a lot of different ways I can go with that. Do you have any questions or anything that you want to probe about it, or?
For you, was it did it act more like a mirror for you of showing you what was already there, or did it truly open up a completely new avenue of something you hadn't seen before?
Yeah. So for me, this was, when I was getting into this, was about 5 years of like pretty intense, we'll call it therapy, I've been doing on myself, personal development work, getting to the roots of who I am, cleaning the corners of my mental space. But what I really feel it does is it, like you say, it's a mirror for what your life is, but it shows you the truth with no story, with no opinion, with none of the fluff that we put on for things. And so when people have a negative experience, this is, my own theory here. When people have very negative experiences, it's because there's so much that they're choosing not to see, or they haven't been able to see, that is actually true. And all of that comes to the surface at the same time. And if, you can imagine an infinite amount of, we'll call it shit, coming to the surface all at once, that's going to be a terrifying experience.
Getting called on all your bullshit simultaneously.
Yeah, literally every piece of everything that that is currently present in your life and in the past, all coming to the surface all at once. That's going to be like not all that fun.
To put it mildly.
Yeah, not going to be that fun. And I'll say, when I was there, when we were doing this experience, I witnessed people having those types of experiences. And for me, one thing that I will say that I'm proud of is that I have done a lot of work to call myself on my own bullshit and have people in my corner to call me on it regularly. And so I'm proud to say that I don't believe there's a whole lot in there to be called on still. So when I went through this, it was just a very spiritual experience where it's like, I remember being in it, in the experience of it. And it's like, I don't even know how I'm going to explain this to myself when I'm done this.
Yeah.
It's like, this is just such an intense connection to, call it source or whatever it is you want to call it, of just seeing like myself, seeing everything that is me. And I just remember when I was having these experiences, the message I received was like kind of like a nod of approval of like, keep going. It's like, stop doubting yourself, stop doubting, what it is you're doing. Like, you're on the path. Just be patient, be here, be present to it, and keep going with it. And so that was my main takeaway from some of the bigger experiences I've done. But I think it, combined with a therapeutic practice of some sort, working with someone who can help you actually make change from this, because this actually goes back to the whole insight versus action thing. It can give you the most insane insights. And it's a very intense experience. But then if you go back and it has no impact on how you live your life, then it really didn't do much other than was an eventful couple hours.
Yeah.
And that's where there's more to it in terms of bringing it to your life.
Or if we put it in terms of, let's say, like a Western medicine, or more traditional Western medicines of a pharmaceutical. It's like, oh, you have a heart condition, and you only ever take the heart condition pills, and you never actually do anything to treat the reasons why you have a heart condition. Plant medicines can be the same way in a very different and also similar way.
100%. Yeah. And I don't want to paint it with that brush too strongly, just because I do believe it has a lot of power and there's a lot of depth and stuff that goes completely opposite to like Western medicine. And I think Western medicine can help you, will help you stay alive when you're on the brink of it. Yeah. And this is more geared towards like, how can we truly live and how can we come alive as humans day to day? And it certainly can unlock areas of yourself that you didn't know were necessarily possible by showing you the capital T truth of your life and what's possible for you. And so I would recommend anyone interested in exploring it, if you feel called for it, it's certainly an avenue that I would recommend and be open to for personal growth. Because again, I was completely anti this stuff. And now I view it as a very powerful tool in the healing and the personal development journey that we're all on and trying to live a good life.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that part of your journey. Since we're coming up around the time frame. Yeah. Keeping everything on the rails from that perspective, respecting your time and everybody listening. Is there anything else that you would like to share from your journey with the audience?
I think we hit on a lot of the major things. The other last piece I would just say is being cognizant of the meaning and the story that you're attaching to the events in your life. Because I mentioned my hockey career, I was going to the NHL. That was the plan. And when that got derailed, I had a lot of stories around it. And that was a lot of built up tension towards that. And I told the story of, it was such a negative experience. It was something that ruined me. It was like a failed hockey experience, when in reality, it taught me so much about who I am, who I want to be, and how I want to go forward. And so just looking abstractly at what's happening here and how can what would be equally true to say about it that brings me more of what I want, whatever that is that you want. And so as a whole, that was the first major shift that I had. And it's something that from just a simple aspect, I think people could take and start to look at. If there's a really negative thing that you talk negatively about, and you pull away a little story to it and maybe attach a new meaning to see if there's anything there, because that's really just been the work of my life. And then the cool part is when you do that, a negative thing, quote unquote, negative thing might happen. You can start to reframe it instantly that you don't even need to wait time. And all of a sudden you're living a pretty good life. So, in wrapping up, I just, lean into who you're trying to be, what you're a yes for, and it's possible to create the life that you're looking to create.
Which in its own right, in a world full of people following the status quo, that's pretty weird.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. I wasn't sure if I was going to be weird enough when we get on here. I feel like we got pretty weird.
Yeah. And that's as with all things intensity related, it's all relative.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. One actually fun fact that I wanted to drop on here. It's funny because you have Weird and Strong. Should have been like 5 or 6 years ago. I think I still own the domain for it. A brand that I was going to go with was called Jacked and Happy.
Oh,
Jacked and Happy. That was the lens I was going in with it, because it's like, that's the whole thing. Let's be weird. Let's be strong. Let's be jacked. Let's be happy. We can have it all. And that's what we're looking to create here. So
I love that. I didn't know that. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's a fun fact that came up. I think I still have the domain for it, so maybe it'll come about one day.
Make it into a thing or a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Awesome. Final things, share with the audience. We already talked a little bit about what you do with 023. Share what you bring into the world.
Yeah, and so into the world, I'm really just looking to help people create a lifestyle that is in alignment with who they want to be and how they want to live, so that we can all live sustainable, attainable, enjoyable ways of living to be the best version of yourself. And I think life is intended to be an exceptional experience. And I'm on a mission of helping more people live that exceptional experience, because I think there's a lot of people who aren't and want to be, and just simply don't have the tools or the abilities to do that. And so the work we're doing is looking to equip people with the tools so that they can live that life. Particularly, we work with coaches like Jeremy. Jeremy just finished up our program, and then equipping that with helping people with these types of skills. And so if you're a person who wants help in these ways, work with Jeremy. If you're a coach who wants help to help people in these ways, come work with us. We're 023 Holistic Systems. You can find us on Instagram, 023_lifestyle_systems, because our old one got hacked, 023 Holistic Systems. That one's gone. But you can find us there, and that's where we talk about all this stuff from a coaching lens. And then you can find me on Instagram at Jordan .Todd with no vowels. So JRDN.TDD. And that's where you'll see some of the ski and the biking adventures when I'm out and about in the playing around the mountains. So
awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and also to get you on the podcast to share your journey and share all the things that make Jordan weird.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share and dive into it. So thank you, Jeremy, for having me.
Yeah. Awesome. And as always, folks, until next time, stay strong, and most importantly, stay weird.